Hello, you've reached the Storied Human podcast, hosted by me, Lynn Thompson. Each week, I share a story, either an interview with someone fascinating or a short solo from me. I love your stories, and I learn so much from them. Hopefully you will too. So welcome. If you are new here, I'm so happy to have you. If you are a returning listener, many thanks. So here it is, the next episode of The Storied Human. Hello and welcome to The Storied Human. I'm Lynn Thompson and I have as my guest today, Ginger Baerg, who has a great story to share with us, and I know you're going to love it. So welcome, Ginger.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be on your podcast with you.
It's so good to have you. I'm so grateful for that Facebook group because I meet the coolest people that want to be guests, and it's just so nice.
Yeah, and I get to find people I would never have found otherwise and hook up with podcasts that I didn't even know existed.
That's the fun part. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just love sharing my story, obviously. And so I love any opportunity I have to just share that.
And we're all about that on The Storied Human. So where do you want to start? Because I do love your story.
Yeah. So let me just start. So God, about 10 years ago, called my family to foster, and we eventually adopted. Actually, I take it back. It was about 11 years ago when the calling started. And so growing up, I had not really thought too much about foster care or adoption specifically. I had some friends that weren't like super close because they kind of lived far away that were adopted, and a few people in school and stuff like that, but it wasn't a huge part of my childhood. And so when I got married, we had 3 kids biologically. And when our youngest was really young, I was at an ice cream social at church, and there was this amazing woman in our church, and they were in the process of adopting from overseas. And this was their 3rd adoption from overseas. And she was just sharing at the ice cream social just how God called her family to adoption in that process. And I remember I was just sitting there, like, I think I was mid-bite of ice cream. And I just knew, like, everything in me knew, like, I'm supposed to adopt. And, like, it hit me so out of the blue that I was just kind of in shock and awe. So I came home and I told my husband, I was like, babe, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to adopt. And his response was, no, we're not. And he was 100% totally against it. And I was like, okay. So I told God, I prayed, and I was like, okay, God, if this really truly is what you've called our family to, I want you to tell Dustin himself. I'm not going to bring it up again unless he does, because I truly want it to be where we're called together, and not that I've badgered him into doing what I think we're supposed to do. So many months actually went by, and I still just had this deep calling, longing. I don't even know how it's like, just, I knew, like, with everything in my being that we were supposed to, but he hadn't brought it up. So I was like, just continued praying every day. And then there was one day I actually stayed home from church because I had a really bad sinus infection. So Dustin and the 3 kiddos went to church, and he came home from church and he plopped on the bed and he goes, babe, we're supposed to adopt. And I was like, what? That's so cool. I know, it was, and I had not, yeah. And he goes, yeah. The sermon today, they were talking about, they're reading in the Bible, and I should know the verse, I don't know it, but it talked about just the spirit of adoption and being adopted into God's family. I'll have to look up the verse later. And he said, as they were reading it, I just knew that we were supposed to adopt. And one thing that's really amazing about that is, I don't know any of you listeners if you have adopted, and just knowing parenting kids from trauma, which adoption is only needed when there's some sort of a trauma, it can be really, really difficult. And so having that clear calling, both of us individually, just made it so much easier to, like, know, yeah, this is hard right now, but this is what we're supposed to do. And when one of us would falter, when it would get really hard and we'd be like, I don't think I can do this anymore, the other one would just kind of remind each other, remind ourselves, this is what God's called us to. We both know this is what. In fact, there was one time, to be totally honest, that both of, like, we were both just like, I just don't know. I don't know if we can keep doing this. And so finally, though, we came to the decision. We either have to say we were wrong and God didn't call us to this, which neither of us could say because it was so clear, or we have to agree that this just really sucks right now, but this is what we're supposed to do. And God's going to give us enough to get through. He's not going to make it easy, but he's going to give us enough to get through it.
So there's a lot of faith involved when you hit those rough patches.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And one thing that makes it easier is God truly does show up in ways that just helps you keep pushing through. Like, there was one time we were fostering a sibling set of 3, so we had 6 kids that were 3rd grade and younger. And I don't even remember why I had to take the kids to Walmart to, I don't remember if somebody broke something or something like that, but we had to go to Walmart to get something that day. Like, it was one of those like time sensitive, like we had to go. And the trip to Walmart, we'll just say, was less than peaceful. Like, it was just, anyways. And we were not like really struggling financially, but we were also trying to really watch our budgets. We were trying not to eat out because a family of 8 costs a lot. But I remember calling Dustin and being like, I know we're not supposed to be spending money on this, but like, I can't, the thought of going home and cooking, like, I just want to give up. I can't do it. Like, Can I please just go through a drive-through on the way home? And he goes, well, funny story. My mom is here with enough Xerox for all of us. His mom lived an hour and a half away. She didn't just stop by.
Oh
like, and so it was just God. He was just so kind in that it took her, I don't even know when she made the Xerox. So like, he knew before I did that I was going to hit a point where I couldn't, like, I was done. And he provided just enough, just some Xerox, just dinner, like just enough to be like, I got you. Like, yeah, it's gonna, I will be there for you. And so that, those kind of moments, like, and I, looking back at those, you have to really kind of like remind yourself, like, he has shown up, he's gonna show up. Like, he's consistent, he's proven himself.
That's a beautiful, just a beautiful sentiment. And it speaks to when you live in faith and when you have faith, that's when you notice those things. And you don't notice those things if you're not like centered. And I really love that you both agreed and you were a team and you pulled yourself through. But let's face it, it's hard to feel like cooking dinner when you have 2 kids. It's a big deal. Yes. And you work full time too, don't you? You're assistant principal?
I am, yeah. So I was a high school math teacher for 17 years. And then last year I went into administration. So I'm starting my 2nd school year as an assistant principal this year.
So how do you do all that? Because that sounds like a lot.
Well, like I tell people when people say like, you're a Wonder Woman, I was like, no, I'm not. Because let's be honest, some days I don't do it well. Like, if we're going to be totally honest, there's days that it's not good. Like, I come home and I'm grumpy with the kids, or I go to school and I'm not focused. I don't have energy. So, I mean, I think all you can do is, and the reason that I'm still working full time is my husband and I both really feel like I'm also called to, education. And in this case, it'd be a middle school assistant principal. And so I guess I just have to trust that God knows what he's doing when he calls me. And times when I get frustrated and I'll tell my husband, like, that's it. Like, I'm just going to quit. And I don't even know what, but I'm just done. Education just too hard right now. And he'll let me kind of do my rant. And then he'll be like, but you're called to this. And I'm like, I know, I don't want to be right now. Like, right now, I want to go work a job where you just clock in and you clock out. And not that they're really that easy. I mean, every job has its things, but right. In that moment, I'm like, I just want a job where I don't have to be always thinking about it,
And so involved. I mean, it's just, middle school is a really special time. It takes special people. I actually subbed a little bit at a middle school, and I actually really love that age group, but I know it's not for everybody. It's like kind of intense. Yeah. Kind of intense. Yeah. So I really admire that you keep all those balls in the air, and we all know how hard it is, again, even with just 1 or 2 kids. So how does your husband help out? Like, how does your home life go with all those children? And
Yeah.
let's make it clear, you had 3 of your own and then you adopted 2, right?
Yes. Yes. So I now have kiddos that range. So I have a 16-year-old son. He's my oldest. I have a 15-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, and then a 9-year-old son. So I definitely could not have transitioned to administration while they were younger. Like there's just no way it would have, in any realm would it have worked, because
It's too crazy, right?
too needy. There's just too much. Now they're pretty self-sufficient in the morning. Like I wake them up, make sure they're up, but they can pack their lunches, eat their breakfast, like they can do all that stuff in the morning.
That's good.
And same thing like after school. Yes, they might need help with some homework, but like overall they can get home, they can unpack their backpack. So that is one thing, is God's timing was definitely, perfect.
Yeah.
My husband's amazing. I could not do any part of just my life without his support. Obviously we both have flaws, but he's just so amazing and supportive, and he's good. When I sometimes struggle with the kids, I get mom guilt, and I won't always stand firm on boundaries of myself. Like I will with rules, but when it comes to like myself, like trying to protect some of my own sanity, sometimes I'll start feeling guilty, so I'll let them kind of go over the boundary. And he's really good with being like, no, that's not okay. Like they can give you that time, or they need to let you finish before they talk and stuff like that. So that's amazing. And then he's just really good with, we look at the schedule and we see who's got to do what. And thankfully he has a job that's a little bit more flexible than mine, as far as if he needs to come in late, or sometimes he can work from home, things like that. So that's kind of how we all make it work.
You sound like a great team. And what I really like is that you said he'll come in and say, no, this is a boundary you need to keep. And I think that's such a great, my husband's like that too. And I always thought, what a great example for our children to show the father honoring the mother and defending the mother, and you got to be that close couple. And that's how it starts. And I think some people get that wrong, and and it's easy to get that wrong. You're so in love with your children and you want to give them everything, but it's really wonderful that you're a team and that you present that way, that you respect each other to your children. That really touches me. Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, and it's always kind of funny when they try to play us against each other, because it never works.
It doesn't work.
We have a lot of flaws, but that's not it. So like if I find out that dad had told them no already and they're asking me, like it's not only no, it's like 5 negatives to go with that. So you wanted to go to a friend's house, now you're grounded for a week because you just tried to play us. And he's the same way. I love
that. Yeah, you got to back each other up. Yeah, because it won't work if you don't. Right.
No, and the kids have to know that we're a team.
I love that. So how did the patchwork quilt come about? I do love that name of the Patchwork Quilt Family of your book, and I love that. Did it come from one of your children? Did they call it that?
So not exactly. So when our 15-year-old daughter, she was the last one that we adopted, and her story is actually more specifically talked about in the second book that's about to come out. So she and her 2 biological brothers actually lived with us for a year when she was in kindergarten. And then they ended up going back into the system. And then many years later is when we found out that she had been separated from her brothers in the system, and she was in need of a placement. Her brothers had found some place, but she was in need of a placement. And I am so sorry. I just forgot what question you asked. I was just going
okay. I was trying to transition to talking about the origin of that Patchwork Family.
Name of the book.
Yeah.
So after she came to live with us, she had already had her parental rights severed. So we knew that adoption was our goal. And we wanted her to feel secure and know that this was her forever family, like her place that was safe forever. And so within just a few weeks, we did family photos together with all of us. And I made this little movie slideshow of kind of each of the kids and us and how we all were together, all came together like a patchwork quilt. And so it was just kind of something for us and for her. And then I decided I wanted to write it in like a book, but originally I just meant for it to be for our immediate family, just something for her to be able to hold on to and see that she was forever here, that she was we're all together now kind of a thing. And so as I was writing it down, and I had one of my really good friends who is an English teacher proofread it, and she actually was the one that encouraged me, like, you need to share your story, you need to publish this. But I mean, this was a very, very personal thing. It was my family. It was our story. Yeah. So at the time, I wasn't quite yet ready to share it with everybody.
Makes sense.
But as you know, with your podcast, as soon as you put it out there, then people can judge it, they can evaluate it, they can, tell you what they think about it. So it took me a while to decide that I did want to share it. And then it was a matter of, do I want to try to find a publisher? Do I want to self-publish it? So it was a pretty long process of going from that slideshow to actually having a book in my hands that people could buy.
How long did it take about?
I think it was like 3 years. I'd have to go. I'm
fascinated by people who go through with this because it's not a short process. Now, did you self-publish or did you find a publisher?
I did. So I spent about, I think like 6 months, not super strenuously, but looking for agents or publishers. And I never heard back. I guess I heard back from 2 or 3 that just said, I don't do, like this genre. I do more like this genre, which I appreciated at least hearing back from them. Yeah. They did more fiction books, and mine's a nonfiction since it's based on our family. And so after, a while, at first I was like, well, maybe my story just really shouldn't be out there then. Like maybe this is everyone saying, yeah, we don't really want your book. But then I have just such amazing supportive friends that they were like, no, that's not necessarily what it means. Like, it just means that's not what you're supposed to do. And so then I found and joined some amazing Facebook groups about just children's books and self-publishing and finding printers. And I was able to find some really good resources there. And my printer was so patient because she did way more than her job description, because I was like, I think I want to print with you, but I don't know what I'm doing. And so she helped me understand how to do a Kickstarter so I could raise the money to print the books, and really connected me with a lot of good resources. So, and then one of the coolest things is one of my best friends did the illustrations. She did art in college. And so I love the fact that my illustrator is a part of our church. She's a really close friend. My daughter's babysit for her kids. I mean, so I wouldn't want it any other way with my book.
It sounds great. Like it worked out. Now, what's the first one about?
So the first one is told from the perspective of my oldest biological son.
Okay.
And I wanted to do that because I feel like a lot of times the kids in the families that foster and adopt, I don't feel like people really hear their story or their perspective.
Right. Good point.
And so my kids they were always amazing. And like, as soon as kids came to live with us, it was 100%, we love you. I mean, obviously they fought like siblings, but there was never standoffishness or we don't really want you here, which I think is huge in order to make the kids feel welcome, to feel valued.
But you guys set that vibe too. Like you set that, like you model that, that acceptance. So the kids, they pick up on that.
And it was always just so devastating for them when the kids left too, because they loved with their whole heart. And so we all, would mourn. And so I just wanted to kind of share his perspective and his story. And he actually always wanted a little brother. And when we adopted our youngest, he finally got his forever little brother. And so that's kind of the perspective and the story of that book. And then it talks about how after that, we adopted, our oldest daughter as well. And then just kind of talks about how our family came together, just like a quilt. And then the second book is told from my oldest adopted daughter's perspective. So it talked more about her kind of journey through foster care and adoption and, becoming a forever part of our family. And so I'm going to be totally honest, I have a hard time getting through her story without tearing up, just because I know all that she went through. So it's, but
it can be rough.
Yes.
You hear a lot of stories.
And she has a lot of trauma from not only before she came into foster care, but also, between the times that she lived with us and just things that happened there. I think one of the hardest parts about doing foster care is when the kids leave your house, you don't get any updates on them. Like you
don't.
Literally, no, you don't know anything.
Nobody talks about that part. That's so sad.
So,
you're expected to just say goodbye and that's it.
So we didn't even realize that for years she had been needing a placement. We found out it was totally a God thing that someone from our church went to help change a light bulb in someone's house and recognized her and was like, hey, look who I saw. Like on Easter Sunday, out of the blue, he just came up to me at church and was like, look who I saw. And there it was. And I'm trying not to use names to protect her, but it was like, there was my daughter, but she was 4 years older than when she left my house, but I recognized her. And I'm just like, so then we called her caseworker that she was with and just was like, is she doing okay? How's she doing? And they're like, she's really not. We can't find her a long-term placement. She's just having to do like nights so like pretty much every night or every weekend she was at a different place. And I was like, oh, no, we're not doing that. She needs to come home.
Oh, that's so good that you were able to find her again.
Yeah. So.
And I like the different viewpoints of the books. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. I especially like that you start with your bio son because we don't usually hear that side of the story. And then we get to see the other side with your oldest daughter. That's wonderful. So what's the first book called?
So the first book's just called My Patchwork Family.
Okay.
And then the second book is Lavender's Story. So it's called My Patchwork Family Lavender's Story. So it's Lavender is not her actual name. I used pseudonyms in the book. Mm. And so there's a reason for each one that I picked. And so in the book, she's called Lavender. And so it's about her story.
That's lovely. And your friend illustrated that one too?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. So cool. It's beautiful. She did such a good job on both of them.
I just feel like it came together perfectly for you.
It did. And one thing I really love is that my daughter was old enough, she helped decide what part of her story she wanted to share, which was really important to me.
Yeah.
And when we met with our illustrator, Michaela, she was there too. In fact, I kind of took a back seat and let her kind of help decide what kind of illustrations. And then obviously sometimes it was like some pages are just so obvious, like what you want on it. And others you're like, I don't really know. So then we would kind of all three brainstorm together, what do we want to put on this page? So
it's a lot of work in addition to everything else. I'm not sure, like, how did you do that? Were there long nights or sleepless nights or?
Sometimes, and it's interesting because like you will kind of write it and then you let it sit for a while. I mean, it's actually good to let it sit for a while and then you'll pick it back up and there's certain things that you're like, oh man, I can't believe I wrote that. Like, that's really good. And then there's other things that you're like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. That's not very good. And you kind of tweak it and then you let it sit for a little while and then you pick it up. So it's not something that you necessarily do like every single day. And with it being a children's book, the amount of writing is a lot less than like if I was writing a novel.
But I'm thinking of deadlines. I know there's always deadlines and that kind of like is a little crazy, right?
Well, one nice thing about self-publishing is there's no deadlines because I'm the publisher,
you make your own deadlines.
I'm the writer. So, and that's one thing with Michaela, she has a lot of little kids, my illustrator. So one thing that was really important to her was that there wasn't strict deadlines because she's got a life, she's got kids, so for me, I was just like, okay, here's what we want to do. So you start painting and let me know when it's done. And during that whole time, I was totally content to just wait because I'm not in a big rush. Like whenever it's ready, it's ready. And
that sounds like a sane way to do a book, honestly.
Yes. So I think I don't think I could do it if it was, you need to have this book done in like a month. That would be too much on top of everything. Cause I need to be able to have that freedom to not write for maybe like 3 months or not even look at it for 3 months and then pick it back up.
Well, I just can't believe that you did all that. And I just think people probably will love reading them, but also will learn so much about the process and maybe be inspired to foster or they'll pass up the knowledge on to someone else who's perfect for fostering. And they'll
Yeah.
learn more about the whole process. And that's always good. And I love that it's from the perspective of the children. That's really special to me. So people will be, they'll be thoughtful when they read that.
Well, and we hope it just opens up discussion because, as a kid, like I said, I never knew anyone that was in foster care. I know there was people that
never did.
were. I mean, it's not a new thing, but you just don't even know. So this opens up those conversations and gets people thinking just about maybe somebody will be like me when I was eating ice cream, just be like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to do that. So maybe my book will help someone be like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Or if not, it might help them have more understanding and empathy for families that do foster care.
Yeah, you got to get the real stories out there because we hear both. We hear these great uplifting stories and then we hear horror stories, but we need to hear reality, and what it's actually like. That's really good.
And I mean, one thing that's true is it's not easy. So I feel like I have to always be upfront when people come to me that want to foster, and I'm always like, yes, especially if you feel God calling you to that, yes, but you also need to be realistic. You can't go into it thinking, like I've heard some people say, well, they'll be so lucky to have me, they're just going to love me and always be thankful. No, that's not realistic. These kids
are not grateful, right?
Yeah, these kids have had trauma.
Yeah, they don't trust you. Yeah.
They've been ripped away from their family, some of them. Like, they're not grateful for that.
No.
So I think there needs to be a realism, too, of...
Yeah. Like, and you have to be bigger than that, right? You have to, have that faith for them, and that eventually they'll get it and be grateful, but not right away. I don't mean to compare a dog to children, but we did recently adopt a greyhound, and it's really hard. And people were like, oh, it's so nice. And I was like, well, no, I wouldn't recommend it unless you have tons of patience. Yeah. And you really love animals and you really are patient with them because they literally come to you with dogs get PTSD and they literally come to you with PTSD. And it's so sad. And I just can't imagine what it must be like with actual human beings in your house, And you reminded me a little bit of when I think I was a teenager and we had a 12-year-old girl come and spend 2 weeks with us. They had a fresh air fund program through our church.
Oh, okay.
And she came from Newark and we still do live in a rural part of New Jersey. So she was like in shock, like just how the farms and the corn and we had a pool. And I remember just sort of opened my head. Like not all kids have the same upbringing. And I think that's so good to expose children to. So I'm hoping that your books do that for others. Yeah, this is great. I want to read them. I got to order them. How do we order them?
So you can order them on Amazon. And the second book right now is available for pre-order. It releases September 8th. My other book you can already, get.
Fantastic. Now, did you ever think that you would be doing all this?
No. In fact, so being a math teacher, I don't know, you know how you tend to put yourself in a box. So math teachers aren't creative is what everyone always says. Math teachers are artsy, they're not creative. So it's kind of just cool and interesting to have that, which is totally kind of in contrast to all of my math background. And obviously as an assistant principal, most people don't view that as a super creative job. It's more of a implementing and, stuff like that. Yeah. But so it's kind of nice to have that creative outlet.
And find that side of yourself. Yeah, I believe lots of people are creative and they don't get it that they are. We do tend to box ourselves. I see people thinking creatively all the time. I think math teachers can super be creative. They can approach a child who doesn't get a problem and think of a whole new way to explain it to them. That's creative. And somebody else brought up a woman will say, oh, I'm not creative. And you'll go into her house and it's so beautiful. And all the colors are so beautiful. And her rooms are so warm. I mean, that's creative. So there's so many ways to be creative. I'm actually a writer. I'm a tech writer and a creative writer. And I see it all the time. Like, people think they can't write, but I'm like, you can write. You can think, you can write. Everyone, here I am saying everyone has a story, but it's really true. Everyone does. And we do tend to think of ourselves as, we're math people or we're English. Like when I was in school, it was definitely that way. And yet we all have different talents that we discover as we get older. Like I did really well in college in formal logic. I got A's in formal logic. It just made so much sense to me. And I was like, wow, I thought you had to be like a math person to be good at that. We're just so much more than we were taught, I think. There's a spectrum.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, a lot of us, as soon as we start to struggle with something in school, and I saw this all the time in the classroom, if students ever struggled with math, they just told themselves, well, I'm just not good at math.
Right.
Instead of realizing that even as a math person, there are types of things in math that I still struggle a little bit with. Like I haven't quite fully gotten my brain 100% wrapped around, whereas then there's other parts that like, I understand it. I know the ins and the outs, and like I see how all of it connects and all of that. And I think a lot of times it's like as soon as we start to struggle, it's just, I'm not a whatever person, like whatever it is you're struggling with, instead of just continuing to push through.
I've seen that a lot. I hope that's fading. I hope people are a little more, younger teachers are a little more open to not encouraging that. When I was young, that was really the way it was. In fact, I remember my teacher, I was saying, I can't do this division in my head. We were learning long division, or I can't do this multiplication always in my head. And she's like, that's okay. You can write it down. Like she was just ready to like, let me off the hook. It was 5th grade. And I think back and I say, well, she shouldn't have let me off the hook. She should have said, why don't you try practicing that? Because that would be great if you could do that in your head. But we just weren't taken seriously if we didn't instantly, if we weren't instantly good at math. And the funny thing is, years later, when I had my kids, I could help them with their math as long as it wasn't like advanced algebra. And I was pretty good at it. And so I thought, why do we say this about ourselves? I always said, I'm not very good at math. I got B's in math. Like, that's pretty good,
That is good,
I got A's in everything else. So we were all very judgmental about ourselves. We were A students. That's ridiculous. It's like, B is fine.
Well, and I think now they really focus on, especially in education, the growth mindset. And it's more, I can't do this yet.
Oh, I like that.
Instead of, I can't do this, or it doesn't make sense to me yet. Things like that, which I think can really change just the way you approach problems,
Mindset,
if you have that net on the end, it makes it totally different. It makes it like
possibility, right? Oh, I love that. Yeah, I really do love that. And I think I noticed too, like the best teachers, the best math teachers had the most, at least in my children's school, often had the gifted students. And I was like, the kids who struggle need those teachers, they need them. And so I'm hoping that's changing too.
I had an absolutely amazing teacher that I student taught with. She was the type of teacher that everyone wanted. I don't know how I got so lucky, but one time she told me that she was actually her math department chair, so she helped set some of the schedule and stuff. And she always told the teachers, you have to have at least one lower level class and at least one higher level class, because if you don't have any higher level classes, you forget where they're going or what they're capable of. And if you don't have any lower level classes, you forget how to help students that are struggling. And you have to be able to do both those things to be a good math teacher. And so that really resonated with me. So I always was like, I need to have at least one class. In Kansas, we call them tier classes, where they need extra support. Sometimes I had a para or another teacher. And I always wanted at least one of those, because you have to remember, like, how do I help students that struggle? Because even when you have like an honors class, just like with me, there's topics in that class that those students are going to struggle with. And it's going to be different for every student. Exactly. But everyone's going to run into that thing where they're just like, this just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. And if you haven't been practicing all those skills of like, how do I help the students that are struggling, you're not going to be able to help them. And that's going to make them feel even more like, well, I guess I thought I was a math person, but I guess I'm not, because
that's a good point. Yeah, even at that level, right? There's some things you're going to struggle with. And I remember somebody, I don't remember which level my daughter was at, but it was such great advice. They said she's an oral learner. She has to say things and hear things. And so they said it's okay if she talks through problems. She should talk through the problems as she's doing them. We won't think she's cheating. She needs to talk. And the minute she started doing that and heard herself talking through the problem, she did so much better. And I just can't even say enough about teachers. I just love them. And I was always super supportive because they went to a little school and it was so teacher focused. The teachers were so happy there. And I just felt like my children got wonderful attention. I just feel forever grateful. And they really loved me because I never complained. I never told them what to do. I was just kind of in awe of them. And funny story, I have a friend who just retired and she taught algebra mostly to 8th graders and 7th graders. And she always had amazing patience with the ones that couldn't get it. And I told her one day, I said, I really wish I could have had you as a teacher way back then. I said, I know we're the same age, but it would have been great, because that's just such a gift to be able to relate to those different kinds of students and to really try different, just to sort of say, oh, I'm not explaining it in a way that you get it. Like, that is such a brilliant way to approach it, instead of, no, let's go over it again exactly the same way. There's like I said, that's very creative. I think it's very creative. So yeah, I'm a big teacher person. I love teachers. I admire them. And they've been so supportive to me I was in the classroom a lot. I did like art education. They had like a separate art education project, and the teachers were all for it. And it was so lovely. We were just talking about that today. We were out to lunch and somebody said, remember when the 8th graders came and sang songs for the kindergartners?
Oh, that's so cool.
It's really, really cool to be in the same building, because that just builds up the 8th graders. They feel really good. And the kindergartners are like, oh my gosh, the 8th graders came to see us. Yeah. And I think it was really special. And my kids could walk through the halls and still see their 1st grade teacher and their kindergarten teacher and their 2nd grade teacher and say hi. So in some ways, a K through 8 is pretty great.
Yeah, it is, if you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Our district is way too big for that. But one thing I think is really cool is our FACS teacher has a project where I think it's kindergartners, but I should probably double check before I say for sure. They draw out like a monster, like picture, and then she has her students make them out of felt. And then the students come up to the middle school and they get it. And so even with them being in different buildings, there's just that connection. And they actually have something, like to hold on to. And it's like, I drew that. And so it's just really cool. Like, I think anytime you can connect kids and give them a chance to lead is really important.
It's so good for them. And I remember my mother, who was a therapist, she talked about how moved she was that the kids that got into trouble with drugs, when they got a chance to talk to younger ones, or when they were in therapy and talking about their younger siblings, they didn't want, they never wanted that to happen to them. And so to give them a way to be part of that program, she was just moved to tears by how much they didn't want them to go through that.
Yeah, they really do want to protect the younger kids.
Yeah. And I love that connecting. I mean, I just think that's brilliant too. Like, oh, here's your felt version of the monster you drew.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like you have a wonderful education system. You sound like you have a really good bunch of schools.
Yeah, well, and I love the teachers in my building. I mean, they're all just so amazing and really relationship driven. So this is not actually the school that I taught in. I was at the high school, and then I ended up moving to a different district in the middle school. And when the principal called me just to tell me he wanted to set up an interview, I think we talked for an hour. Like, I don't think I've ever done that before. But I was asking him questions, and when I got off the phone, my husband was like, yeah, you guys definitely are speaking the same language. Like, whatever it is, you guys are speaking it. And I was like, yes, they have all these things in place to be a team and build relationships and really advocate. And I was like, this is I really hope that this is the job I get.
So
And
good.
obviously it's still not an easy job, but I love it.
Well, it's such a calling. That's what I always notice with all the teachers that I work with. It's not a job. It's not a job. It's a calling.
Yeah,
like being a nurse.
Just a job, we would have quit a long time ago.
Oh, yes, it would be horrible if it was just a job. You have to have that love and that caring, that unconditional regard is what our principal called it. He goes, that unconditional regard for the students. And we just had a young friend become an RN. It was really hard. She had to go to nursing school and work. And I feel the same thing about nurses, that it's such a calling. It's such a hard job, but they care so much. So thank God for nurses and teachers. I wish they would pay, especially teachers. I wish they were able to compensate teachers better.
Yeah, nurses too. I mean, both of them.
Both of them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I just really admire people that go into those kind of professions, because I'm not sure I could handle it. I've done tutoring. That was fun, but I don't think I was. Just from subbing, I could tell that I just can't give enough to a crowd of children. I want to give to every child. So everybody's different, but it certainly seems like you're where you're supposed to be. Now, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know? Any advice or any?
So I guess I'd like to give advice. Anyone who's thinking about possibly fostering or adopting, if you are married, definitely you both have to be on the same page. It is way too hard to do. It's too exhausting if you guys are not on the same page. And if you have kids that are older, they need to be on the same page too, because everyone has to make sure that they're making those kiddos feel welcome and loved and part of the family immediately. The other thing I would say is make sure you have your tribe. Make sure you have the people that are going to love on you, help you, and the ones that are going to speak truth to you. Because sometimes when things get hard, people that love you and are really speaking out of love, they'll tell you it's just too hard, you need to give up. And it's because they see that you're hurting. But that you need the people that are going to say, I know this is hard and we're here for you, but you need to keep going. And so those are the kind of friends that you really need to find, the ones that they'll be there for you. They're not going to lie and say, oh, this is easy, what are you talking about? But they'll also continue to push, but also show up in real ways. They're in real ways. Like I have friends that I can call, when things get really bad, and they'll be here. And so you need to have that, or find that, or even if it's not necessarily people in your community, find it online. Like there's so many ways. But you need to find people that you can be open and honest with, but that aren't just gonna tell you to give up when it gets hard.
I think that's excellent advice. It takes a village. It's not just your family. You need support. Well, I think we've learned a lot more than we knew in the beginning, my listeners and I thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting, and I love your story. And
thank you.
I'll let people know how to contact you in the show notes, and I'll put info about your book. And we're right on time for ordering the second one. We can pre-order, and we can expect it September 8th.
Yes.
Oh, good. Yep. That's so good. Ginger, it was a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was great.